Must.
Good morning, everyone. Today is September 23rd. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Finance Committee. We will begin with a review of the 2021-2022 financial report. Mr. Rudel.
So this is the first financial report of fiscal year 22 through August. We are projecting a year-end positive balance of $167,740. The two big areas of unknown are currently the damage due to Storm Elsa and Storm Ida. So the forecast does assume at this point we will be reimbursed for expenditures that were incurred due to those two storms. Storm Elsa, excluding the vehicles that were appropriated by the Board of Finance on Tuesday, have damages totaling $31,084. All have been submitted to KERMA, though KERMA has not let us know what our reimbursement will be. However, Storm Ida, we are expecting damages to be in excess of $400,000. There's some significant damages to a boiler at Hinley, some grounds equipment, and some facility material and equipment products. With that said, the general education RCs are forecasted at a positive 170,332. The special education RCs are essentially flat at a positive 208. We do have one COVID expense, which we'll get to, showing a deficit of 2,800 to get you that 167,740 positive balance.
Mr. Rudel, could you just speak a little more into the microphone? I don't know if it's catching on Zoom. Thank you.
Yep. RC3, we do have a deficit in the principal account of 51,425. As the transition from the previous principal to the current principal is effective through September 30th. This is one of the three transfers that we'll bring forward to the board that we'll discuss later. RC11, there is a positive balance of 8,370 in athletic training services. We have had a resignation of an athletic trainer. This assumes that it'll be filled by October 1st. It's unlikely at this point that it'll be filled by October 1st, so that balance will probably change in the next financial report. Facilities custodial overtime, RC11 shows a positive balance of 34,170. The new YMCA agreement calls for us to be reimbursed for custodial overtime. And then athletic transportation shows a positive balance of $5,156. And due to the bus shortage, that's really nationwide, we don't have enough drivers available for the boys golf team at this time. And so that is the positive balance for that athletic team. RC12 maintenance. The district electrician retired at the end of August. The replacement did not start. That should actually say September. And as a result, we have salary savings of $3,400. RC16 legal fees show a positive balance of $8,800. The first month legal fees were less than budgeted. So that trend from last year seems to be continuing forward, at least in the beginning half of this year. RC18, we did want to highlight staff turnover. It does show a positive balance of $129, so we have met our staff turnover credit. We did budget a turnover of 28 employees with an average savings from Masters 19 to a Masters 15. We did have 53 members turn over. However, of those 53 members, 24 were under a step 10. And 19 members of the 53 were hired at a more expensive rate than the employee that left. So as a result, one would think we'd actually have more staff turnover savings given the quantity of teachers who turned over. but given that a good amount were actually under step 10 and some were actually hired above, we did not get as much turnover savings as one would expect with that quantity. If you actually deduct out the 24 teachers under step 10, which is rather unusual, it would get you to 29, which was relatively close to the forecast of 28, which is really why we're at about $129 positive. Contract support shows a positive balance of $6,985 as unaffiliated salary increases were less than budget. Budget control shows a positive balance of $43,467. 3.4 of the 4 FTEs were approved by the board. Dues and memberships is forecasted to show a savings of $11,500. The state did provide a grant to CREC, who's sponsoring the teacher in residence program, and that grant reduced all the membership fees to all the participating districts. So that grant that CREC received allows for the savings of the $11,500 in membership fees. RC 23, Darien Summer School. Consultant services shows a positive balance of $41,706. We had less expenditures due to less revenue than budgeted. This is going to be a recommended transfer as well that we'll talk about, essentially to collapse those two accounts. General office supplies in Darien Summer School shows a positive balance of $2,500, and then general teaching supplies again shows a positive balance of $21,935. And then Darien Summer School revenue was $40,021 less than budgeted, but again, there's corresponding expenditure offsets as a result of less classes than budgeted. RC 24, the transportation driver shows a positive balance right now of $9,000. We have not hired the third driver that was approved in the budget because we can't actually get the vehicle. There is a vehicle shortage. We did order the vehicle when the budget opened up. The arrival date is expected to be early November, though that could get pushed back. So we have had to contract out that route in the meantime. Legal fees in RC 24 shows a positive balance of $11,800, as legal fees have trended under budget in RC 24 as well. In-district transportation shows a favorable balance of $14,285 from ESY savings. And then out-of-district transportation shows that negative balance of $23,285. And again, that is because we have not been able to acquire that third Suburban, so we have had to contract that out. Assuming that we get the Suburban and a driver for November, that should be the deficit. If that extends, then we'll have to bring another transfer forward to the board depending on when that vehicle comes through. Just as a reminder, we have budgeted a reimbursement rate this year of 67.5% for excess cost. The first submission is December 1st. RC 25 fixed. Electricity is forecasted at a positive balance of about $32,000 based on current consumption trends. Property insurance is forecasted with a positive balance of $8,122 based on favorable renewals with KERMA. It would probably be important to note that when we look at the fiscal 23 budget, we'll probably see a significant increase in our property insurance given the amount of claims that are being submitted for this year. Workers' compensation is forecasted at a positive balance of $20,735 based on favorable renewals with KERMA. General liability insurance is forecasted with a positive balance of $2,105 based on favorable renewals with assured partners. And then student accident insurance is forecasted with a favorable balance of $10,432. ELP teacher aide shows a favorable balance of $5,157 due to salary savings from a vacant position. And then ELP tuition is short revenue by about $16,747. This is based on students that have either already enrolled or have put down a deposit so that we know they will start at some time. There is obviously a possibility we can get students anytime throughout the year, and as that happens, we will update the forecast. RC 28 COVID. Transportation is forecasted at a deficit of $2,800 as our out-of-district transportation provider are requiring additional cleaning to utilize their services similar to last year. We anticipate bringing a transfer to the board probably for the September meeting just to highlight that expenditure at first. There are no real alternatives for these out-of-district providers given the bus shortages. So we essentially have no choice but to pay that expenditure.
Board questions. Mrs. Ritchie. Sorry, committee questions.
Just to go back to the KERMA, all the KERMA costs that we're going to see. I was hoping that maybe for future presentations, there could be more of a, this is my request, and I don't know if everybody else agrees with it, but just more of a comprehensive presentation so we see all of the items that are captured in this. Just from a financial perspective, it would be great to see that itemized and tracked in the narrative as we work through that.
Can I just ask a follow-up on that? So how are we managing now with the losses we've had? How are we managing now? And I ask from a financial standpoint, should we expect to see transfers if insurance is delayed? Will we expect, when would we expect maybe a real pressing need if we don't have an answer?
Yeah, go ahead.
So we are going to get something for insurance. It's just a matter of what. If we have a gap similar to what we had with the trucks, that would be the transfer to bring forward. We've kind of hounded Kerma a couple times a week, every week since this happened, to find out when we're going to actually get our reimbursement. They're still working on ELSA, so I wouldn't imagine we'll have any idea on what IDA will look like, though IDA is obviously the more expensive issue. Once we have an idea on what ELSA looks like, the board can make a decision as to whether or not to transfer that gap in expenditures that's likely, or to ask for an appropriation. We are hoping probably within the next 6 to 8 weeks that we'll find out about ELSA. And then in terms of IDA, it'll likely be the same issue. Once we actually find out what we're going to get, the board's going to have to make a decision as to whether or not they want to ask for an appropriation to cover any potential gap, or whether or not they want to cover that internally with any potential budget transfers.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just follow up on
Mr.
the
Sini.
So on these savings that you showed, the 41,000 throughout insurance savings, are those premium savings at this point, or?
Those are premium savings.
Okay.
So every year, the town and the Board of Ed essentially go out to get a renewal for Kerma. So whether it's workers' comp or property insurance, they give us an estimate for our budget. The renewal doesn't usually come in until the beginning of the year. And so those were just savings based on experience. It's one of the reasons we would expect property insurance for next fiscal year to be much higher. Similar, if you have a homeowner's claim on your insurance and they pay you out, they typically want to recoup that money as best they can in future premiums. So we would expect future years that property insurance to go up. And then with student accident insurance, which is not a town policy, just a Board of Ed policy, it's really based on what claims you had in the previous year. So because we did have part of a hybrid year, athletics were somewhat on pause last year. Student accident insurance was just less than anticipated.
Okay, and so this is a one-time adjustment down. And we're
Correct.
not, you're setting the budget for the rest of the year.
Correct.
And then we'll readdress in the next budget.
Correct.
Thank you, sir.
So if we could just, I would second then Mrs. Ritchie's request, especially
Yep,
since
we
we're
can
gonna
do.
have to figure out, and maybe the answer is insurance will cover it all, which would be
Yep.
great, but if we could see a list
Yep,
of
we
what
can
was
do that.
lost, so we can start to think about what might need to be covered or what actions we might need to take.
Yeah.
Mrs. Parent, and then our chair has a question.
I would-
Go ahead.
Just, Rich, my understanding too is that Mr. Lynch is going to, has that contract out. Some of the equipment. So just an understanding of what these costs are. Like,
Sure.
I understand there's an issue with getting that equipment, even if we have the funds. So that could be more long.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
And are those expenses for contracting out accounted for at this time?
Not as of yet, because it actually started past August. We were able to procure a couple of mowers, so our grounds staff can actually cut grass. There was a gap in period where we had nothing. You'll see those expenditures in the September report because it happened post-August. And then anything that has to get contracted out in terms of lawn care will be seen in care of grounds in RC12.
Okay, so we should expect to see some probably fairly significant changes in the September report.
Depending on what we see with insurance, you could see
Okay.
significant changes.
All right, Mr. Seen.
Yeah, just one follow-up on the insurance. So if you could break it out, capital versus
Yep.
OpEx.
Sure.
I mean, that 400,000 that you outlined today, do you have any breakdown of the capital versus OpEx?
So of that, about $100,000 relates to the boiler at Henley that was submerged. So that would really be a capital expenditure. About a little over 100,000 relates to equipment for lawnmowers. They're not like the typical lawnmower you might see for somebody's house. The lawnmower that was lost was actually a street legal lawnmower with a license plate on it. It could drive 30 miles an hour on the road. So that's actually close to $100,000 lawnmower.
Okay.
So those are really what make up the bulk. And then you do have some operating expenditures, which were smaller items like electrical materials, carpenter tools, carpenter materials. One of the things that unfortunately, given what happened with Ledge Road, Mike is really kind of almost shut down the carpentry shop at Ledge Road. And so now it's, instead of being able to do things in the carpentry shop, it's when you need the materials, you go out, get the materials, you do the work.
Thank you.
Mrs. Ritchie.
This might not be for finance, but it might be for discussion somewhere else. Just, are we satisfied and feeling safe storing our equipment in the future in that location, given what we experienced with Elsa? So I guess something to think about is that where we want our expensive $100,000 lawnmower to be stored.
Well, we've between the storms, we moved them up a few feet and that didn't work. So we do have to do a wee bit of reflection as to what we might do moving forward.
Further board questions, committee questions, Mrs. Parent.
Thank you. Just a quick question about the ELP teacher aide that's vacant. Will that be filled or is that will not be filled?
It depends on what ends up happening with student enrollment.
Okay. My other question about hiring is, this is not for this meeting, but I would just love more of an idea of what does our staff look like now? It seems like we're hiring either more seasoned teachers or more teachers with advanced degrees. I would just love to know a general breakout of what we have.
Mrs. Ritchie.
RC 11, I see that we have a positive balance due to the bus shortage, and you mentioned the golf team, and it's my understanding that the swim team doesn't have access to a bus either. So is there cost savings related to that?
Chris is working on whether or not he can get an outside provider, which is why we haven't flagged it. Some of the swim team have been using bus 25. So that was the bus that was added a couple of years ago. It is an under-enrolled bus, though the concern is that they do have to leave the school when school dismisses, as opposed to slightly after, which would have been the norm. So depending on how that works out, that would have to be updated as well.
So just a follow up and a general, I mean, we're down a trainer, we're down some drivers. I think there's probably a board question there. How are we operating? Are we operating safely? But also on the financial side, if we can get an update, it doesn't have to be tonight. What are the effects in the meantime, right? You need to have a certain number of trainers. So are we contracting out? Do we expect to see in September more expenses as that relates? So, and it doesn't have to be today, but I think maybe when we present for the board meeting, just to know in the meantime, we're from like an operating standpoint, a safety standpoint, what we're covering, and then the financial implications.
Okay. He's giving you that view for the full year right now in this forecast, right? We missed a payment, but you're anticipating to hire somebody not going forward. So that's the savings right now for the full year that he's outlined.
So
Am I
yes.
missing you on the financial side?
No, I understand how to read. I was asking more, we need a certain number of trainers. We're down a trainer. So are we contracting out? Are our students covered at the field? And that corresponding contracting cost, I understand what you're saying, it's going to push forward, but how are we going to account for it? Is
So-
all I'm looking for.
For the trainer, at least, he has not contracted out yet. We have two trainers. Typically, we have two trainers. We only have one right now. Some nurses have helped in the intermediate. The question will be whether or not he can find a second trainer when sports really kick up. Obviously, there's a little bit more of a strain on the existing trainer, but he has not contracted out.
So,
Yeah.
and that would be my other question, which we can handle at the board table, the board meeting. Are we sure our students are covered? I happened to be at events the other day and the trainer was running all around the field for multiple incidences on both sides. So I just want to make sure our athletes are covered. Thanks. More questions? Mr. Sini.
So there were a couple of emails that Deb sent August 12th and September 6th about, citing a anticipated operating deficit and projected and recovery remediation services. So I just want to be clear right now, as of the first month, we have no projected or anticipated operating deficit or additional projected recovery and remediation services.
We do not have a projected deficit in the aggregate. There are certain line items, but not in the aggregate.
Okay, and can I move to the grants, or are you going to go through the grants separately?
Either way.
I don't mind.
Okay,
We all
so-
have the packet. We don't need to read them, but
Yeah, yeah.
go ahead. Okay, so
Questions
why don't
on-
we handle this and then we'll move to grants?
Well, actually, it's part of this subject
Okay,
matter.
go ahead,
So,
Mr. Sini.
so the grants that you outline on page 5, if there were any unanticipated remediation services, around some of these grants, that's where the monies would come from first. Is that?
So you obviously have your funds in the operating budget. We did allocate funds in the American Rescue Plan budget. And then as we mentioned at the last meeting, the district did get a grant for ARP IDEA. That grant is intended for remediation services. So obviously if you've exhausted your expenditures in the first 2 areas, that would be the next to look at. That does give you an opportunity and a likelihood to carry some of that money over if you don't. So if you have remediation services that aren't necessarily going to happen this year, but might happen in a future year, having those funds allocated to carry over will help offset that too.
Perfect. Thank you.
So just to follow up on that, the ARP IDA grant, which we received, was a surprise to the district
Yes.
in September.
Yes,
Yes.
it was a
Yes.
pleasant surprise. So just following up
Yes.
on that, how are you going to report that grant going forward? Because as I recall, we've pretty much allocated those monies. Are we going to see, will we receive that on a monthly basis as part of the reporting as we did in the past? So we can.
Yep. So with here, you see the ARP, the original ARP grant.
Right,
Once the ARP IDEA grant is filed, and it is due in November, you'll see the line items. It's similar to the title grant. It's filed in October. Once those will delineate those line items. And then when there are expenditures, we'll address that in the grant report.
So the same way as we delineated the ARP, for the first round, we'll do the same thing, come back with it. Here's kind of what we're proposing to how to expend it.
fantastic.
Thank you.
Mr. Sini.
So I just want to make a comment. It is so wonderful to start with a surplus versus last year at this time, we had a $1.1 million deficit. So it's going to be a better year. It looks like anyway. So I'm looking forward to that. The electricity expense, how are we not using that much electricity? I guess is the question.
So one of the things that we have internally in the business office is we actually go through every bill. We create a forecast that shows what our consumption is, what the demand charges are. And it's almost like a rolling forecast. And so we look back at what our last 12 months are to project out your forward. We did have some savings last year. And so some of those savings, it's really just consumption driven and then demand changes. Obviously, if you end up having a warmer spring or even a warmer fall, or using more air conditioning, then that forecast could go down. If it goes in the other direction where it's not as warm and maybe you're not using as much air conditioning, then that savings could go up.
Could it be tied to summer school not having as much enrollees too, or?
I mean, it could be.
I know it's tough to
across
tell.
all of it.
And sorry, the last one is, did have the last one, I'm sorry. Oh, the legal expense. Is it just the fact we're not approaching the attorney as much as we had in the past? I mean, is that what's driving it?
Pretty much.
Okay, thank you.
So a couple things. I would caution the committee. We have 1 month of financials. I just don't want, anyone listening to think we have a big surplus right now.
Still
We are
very
running
early.
lines that
Still
have
very early.
deficits. It's expected. This is very typical if you're used to watching these budgets to see a report like this. And I think we've had a lot of unanticipated expenses. No one maybe could have anticipated $500,000 in storm damage. But I would for those listening, when we say we have a surplus, we are not in May or June talking about surpluses. We're 1 month in. So things like electricity, we don't use a lot of in August. So it's to be expected.
It's still very early.
Mrs. Ritchie.
So on RC 24, we're down the one vehicle and we're hoping to hire. Do you think there could be a challenge just based on the fact that there's a hiring shortage for bus drivers in the state? We may get our vehicle, but we may not be able to put someone in the driver's seat. Do you anticipate that could be a concern or a
So it is
problem?
very difficult to find a driver in general. We had a resignation of a driver for one of the Suburbans, and it took quite a bit of time to actually find that driver. So there's 2 challenges associated with that. The first challenge is actually getting the vehicle. We don't want to hire anybody if you don't have a vehicle, because then there's nothing for that person really to do. But then there's going to be a challenge in finding an individual to drive as well. And that challenge is not just for the Suburbans, but it's also for first student out of district transportation. It's really across the board.
And the additional factor is to make sure that they're all meeting the vaccination requirements on top of it.
All right, can we move, are we prepared? Oh, sorry, Mrs. Richards.
Quick question on the food services projections. I just wanted to clarify, are you projecting the year-end surplus at this point would be $56,793?
Yes.
That seems low. Is that historically a low number?
Historically, you've been negative to a positive 100,000. It really fluctuates. One of the things we're also facing this year, aside from a driver shortage, is the food shortage. Being able to source food is also very difficult. Sales right now have averaged about 11,500 a day, give or take. Last year, towards the good part of the year, towards the second half of the year, we were doing about 8,000. If we look year over year, we were doing closer to $4,000 a day. We'd like that to be probably closer to about $15,000 a day. But obviously we need product in order to do that. So conservatively, we're saying about 56,000.
So we know looking forward, what is the typical balance you would like to see at the start of the school year in order to be able to make the purchases that we need? So in other words, where I'm going with this is it's very early, so we're not sure. And hopefully the daily numbers will go up. But if it stays at that level, would there be a transfer required to make sure that you have enough?
If we're able to maintain 11.5, I think we'll be fine without a transfer. Obviously, a lot depends as long as schools stay open. I mean, that's the biggest issue. Our fund balance is still relatively healthy at a little over $200,000. The concern last year was obviously kids were either not in school, you had half the population in school, and people were concerned just about eating lunch in school.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and the idea really is food service is self-sustaining, that we're not transferring in and out of food service, because that really should be a self-sustaining.
Does the concession stand help with the food service budget?
It does. So the sales for the concession stand hit into the food service account. They've had 2 events so far, the first football game and then a field hockey game. In total, they've sold about $3,000 between those 2 events. And then I believe there's another one this Friday.
I guess along those lines, Rich, is there a revenue opportunity by operating it during the youth sports, days of youth sports? You have DGFL games going on, on both fields some days.
So Chartwell's has actually been talking to the athletic director about that and whether or not there'd be an interest. As long as there's an opportunity for sales, they'd be interested in running that concession stand. The biggest thing for the concession stand is the games that are by that pavilion tend to do the best. The ones that are on like the upper oval tend not to do, because a lot of parents obviously don't want to have to walk down to the back of the school. But any games or events that are down there are certainly an opportunity. And Chartwell's has been incredibly interested about being able to take on that pavilion and offer options for families.
Yeah, might I suggest, being a longtime user there, they reconcile the home games with the football because they are the ones held back there. I think field hockey also on the baseball diamond as well. So at least in the fall.
Yep, sure.
I think all sports have 1 to 2 matches down, so that might be something the athletic director and the food service takes a look at.
Just interesting to note this, it's not financial in nature, but the quality of the food service is notably been improving significantly. So changes at the high school make it look like really like a college sort of food option for kids. So it's as I go around the schools and talk to the students, it just seems to be very well received.
When we're allowed in the building, maybe you can take us
Yeah,
out to
maybe.
lunch.
Everyone ready to move on to budget transfers for August 21, 22? Perfect. Mr. Ruda.
So there are 3 for the board to consider. The first is to extinguish the line item for the principal at the middle school for $51,425. We are recommending taking savings from the favorable balance in workers' compensation, student accident insurance, contract support, and the Darien Summer School teaching supplies. So nothing that would affect anything. The second is really more of an accounting adjustment, but it does cross broad categories, is just to collapse the Darien Summer School revenue with the savings and consultant services for $40,021. And then the third transfer is for out-of-district transportation due to the not being able to acquire the third Suburban. So this is for $23,285. If we're not able to get the Suburban in early November along with the driver and we continue to contract out, we would have to bring a secondary transfer to the board.
Any questions on the transfers? There's 3 transfers.
Correct.
Yeah. If there are no questions, I'll move on to public comment. Is there any public comment today?
Good morning. If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participant's icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. When it is your turn to speak, the facilitator will identify you and announce that you are unmuted for public comment. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment.
That's just awesome.
There are no raised hands at this time.
All right, thank you, everyone. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Mrs. Ritchie and Mrs. Parent, all in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.